Halo Combat Evolved. In 2001, if you were alive, owned an Xbox, and weren't too busy basing your entire personality off of one of the movies that came out that year, chances are you were basing your entire personality off of this game. Or you could be like me and make it a healthy balance between Halo and Shrek. Upon its release, Halo changed the lives of console shooter players and terrified parents who didn't understand the psychology of video games. To this day, it is considered revolutionary for its big, open maps, its advancement of console aim mechanics, and its incredible multiplayer experience. Its compelling plot dared to tackle more than just shoot all the bad guys because they're bad. It was also about running the bad guys over with a car. I'm just looking for somebody, I'm sorry! I just need somebody to man the gun! Okay, and it was also about humanity's relationship with religion and technology. Fine. While I have several lasting memories of this game, the first time I drove a Warthog, the satisfaction of driving a tank into an open battlefield, the feeling of accomplishment from landing clean, critical hits on hunters, or that feeling of frustration you get when you wanted to queue up for a multiplayer game but one of your friends wouldn't stop pressing X like, come on Kyle, all we want to do is just play Lockdown, can you please just stop doing that? One memory still stands out as the most iconic, and it doesn't take long to find it. While Halo revolutionized the shooter genre in several ways, its music is arguably one of the greatest standout elements of its production. While FPS games have taken off in the last 2 decades, largely piggybacking off of Halo's many innovations, companies have had plenty of time to build on Halo's enemy AI, creative gameplay, and good graphics. But in my opinion, no FPS title has been able to match Halo's incredible soundtrack. But what is it that makes Halo's music iconic? What makes it stand out from a sea of grandiose shooter soundtracks? And what is it that makes Halo's music so quintessentially Halo? The answer to that question is the Dorian scale. Alright, thanks guys so much for watching. A huge thanks to my patrons over on Patreon. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. But Adam, what is the Dorian scale? Why is it important? And what does it have to do with Halo's music? I have so many questions! Okay, I'll answer your questions, but only because you asked me so nicely, and not because I wrote out this entire rant word for word as a narrative device and fully intended to explain what I was talking about the whole time. But before we continue this video about how the Dorian scale is the defining feature of Halo's music, I should point out that it's a little bit more complicated than that, and while complicated hat-assery does make me a very good doctoral student, it doesn't always lead to compelling YouTube videos. So while there's a lot to say about the aspects of Halo's music and how it affects our experience of the game, the use of the Dorian scale specifically has some very enlightening and significant consequences, so I'm kind of just sticking to that. Just remember that when it comes down to it, Halo owes its unique sound to the unique voice of its composers, Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. Seen here preparing to release their prog rock Hall & Oates cover album. Speaking of which, let's hear from Martin real quick about how Halo's main theme came to be.
And so I knew just the general idea of what it was going to be, and we decided it needed to sound epic, mysterious, and ancient. And I was driving over to the studio and thought, well, ancient, monks sound ancient. And I started singing some monk chants in my head and came up with that melody and came in and recorded it, and boom.
As far as iconic soundtracks go, this one has a pretty simple origin story. But you don't get a monk chant just from singing whatever you want with a hushed, warm tone. Believe me, I've tried. Everywhere I'm looking now, I'm surrounded by your embrace. Baby, I can see your halo. You know you're my saving grace. So in order to understand what makes this monk chant monkish, we have to use music theory and music history. In the vast majority of Western music in recent years, and by recent years I mean like 500 conservatively, pitch is usually organized into either major or minor. This is important because as musicians, listeners, and in this case God-tier gamers, We tend to be so saturated in that major and minor tonality that we tend to think of things in that major-minor dichotomy. But from about the 5th to 15th centuries-ish, okay, like the Middle Ages, major and minor were not the concepts they are today, but rather they were just afterthoughts of the 8 modes of Gregorian chant. And one of those modes, the one that all the cool kids were singing, was the Dorian mode. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Dorian scale is the set of pitches that you would get if you were to play from D to D on the keyboard using only white keys. And most of us major-minor-minded modern musicians tend to think of it as a minor scale with a raised 6th scale degree. While the Dorian scale is used in jazz, classical, and even pop music in some cases, that collection of pitches is most closely associated with the chant melodies of the early Christian church. So chances are when you opened Halo for the first time, you associated that melody with ancient religious practices, even if you had never heard the term Dorian mode before. Or, to quote another YouTuber, "You might not have noticed it, but your brain did." The religious undertones of the main theme go hand in hand with other elements of Halo's narrative, both subtle and overt. For example, our protagonist's full character name is Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, which could be in reference to any number of Bible verses, including John 1:17, 1 John 1:7, Revelation 1:17, or just that the historical 1 John became the 7th bishop of Jerusalem in 117 AD. Cool. That f***ing happened. Then there's the name of our main enemies, the Covenant and the Flood, which is a reference to the story of Noah, where God destroys the world with a flood, but then makes a covenant with Noah that he shall never again destroy the world with a flood, which is why the game eventually introduces an ark. And then there's that part in the second game where, like, the Covenant gets so entrenched in their corrupted religious ideals that they almost destroy everything. And, like, I don't know, I couldn't find any real-life allegories for that. Huh. The first phrase of the main theme uses the first 4 notes of the Dorian scale, or the first tetrachord, and establishes something of a somber prayerfulness. While it still sounds like a chant because it's, you know, being chanted, we still haven't quite scratched the surface of that Dorian flavor. It's not until the second phrase that we get a real taste for that Dorianness, when we hear more of the 5th, 6th, and 7th scale degrees, part of the second tetrachord. And it's that major 6th, minor 7th scale degree relationship that really distinguishes the Dorian mode. No matter how much musical expertise you have, if you are a longtime Halo fan, this melody, this use of the Dorian mode is hardwired into your brain at this point. So, just for fun, let's see what would have happened if Martin O'Donnell had written this in, say, a minor key. See, that difference, that 1 scale degree difference, it's a small thing, but it just doesn't have the same vibe. Like, I'm not as intrigued. Okay, now let's hear the same theme in major. That one just hurts my soul. In the second half of the melody, we drop below the tonic E, dance around it a bit to create some interest, and then finally resolve the melody on a prolonged 7-1 resolution, which is quite common in plainchant. It sounds resolute. It sounds determined. But most importantly, it sounds like calm? Which, can we talk about that? Because, like, that's weird. It's good weird, but, like, okay, we don't think about it much because it's been 20 years, The original Halo is almost old enough to buy a case of Natty Boh, and we know this title screen better than we know some of our relatives' faces. But it's 2001. The idea of a shooter game title screen starting with anything other than Nine Inch Nails is ballsy. And it totally paid off. But things don't just end with the main theme. There are so many good tracks in this series, and if you were to just take one of those tracks and drop it into another game, it wouldn't fit. It would feel weird. See? It's weird. So let's talk about why Halo's music is so quintessentially Halo. Prior to the Halo series, modal melodies didn't see that much use in major video game titles. Most of the major shooter games preceding Halo stuck to themes in minor scales, emphasizing the no-nonsense badassery of their protagonists. But the subtle difference that you get from changing the 6th scale degree and emphasizing that change makes a world of difference in how we as a player experience the game. Martin O'Donnell composed Halo's main theme for the game's demonstration at the 1999 Macworld Conference and Expo. Oh, because if you didn't know, Apple used to control Bungie, and therefore the Halo IP, which in retrospect is hilarious. But yeah, O'Donnell wrote that theme and had it recorded in 3 days, and it was a huge hit. So when Microsoft bought Bungie and production got serious, that simple chant melody became the blueprint for the entire soundtrack. Not only did O'Donnell and Salvatore compose much of the soundtrack in Dorian, they also weaved together the contour of that simple melody into many of its other themes. The main theme itself presents this approach very overtly, allowing for more subtle iterations later on. After we hear that chant melody in the intro, the first line of that melody then becomes the outline for the cello ostinato. Then, the second line of the chant melody becomes the outline for the violin melody. Also in the category of overt, though like maybe, I don't know, one tier down in overtness, in the sound cue Perilous Journey, you can hear horns playing the main melody under a more frantic string and drum sound. The main theme also makes its way into On a Pale Horse, this time as driving eighth notes in the upper strings. Perhaps a bit harder to hear is its influence on Devil's Monsters, the cue that we hear when we first encounter the Flood. The theme begins voicing the tonic A with interspersed B's and C's to establish the more minor-sounding aspects of the melody, but then, just as the main theme does, the melody in Devil's Monsters works its way up the scale to establish and highlight those Dorian relationships. This is where we start to see how this ancient scale meets our modern ears, because while medieval monks would have thought of the Dorian mode as just the Dorian mode, we young people born following the Renaissance tend to think of it through the lens of major and minor scales. What's more is that we tend to relate major sonorities with emotions like happiness and positivity, while we relate minor sonorities with melancholy, somberness, or anger. Remember earlier when I said, think of the Dorian scale as a minor scale with a raised 6th scale degree? Think of it as a minor scale with a raised 6th scale degree. Well, that raised 6th scale degree sounds to us like it's being borrowed from the major, so we tend to think of the Dorian mode as minor with some major flavor. While the Dorian mode was sometimes associated with mournfulness in the medieval era, it was generally regarded as a neutral mode. It was functional, it served a variety of purposes in worship and prayer. But to modern musicians, Dorian isn't so much treated as a neutral mode, but rather as an ambiguous one. To put it somewhat crudely, the minor 3rd and 7th scale degree make us sad, but the major 6th scale degree provide a degree, of hope. Stupid. In a game that ends with you thinking that every other soldier died, but in doing so you saved humanity, that works. If you're like me, you've played through the original Halo campaign more times than Vermin Supreme has run for president. So like more than 5. Why are these my jokes? I need to stop filming so late. So at this point, you might not need any help making your way through the campaign, but for every game, there's always a first playthrough. When game designers are developing new titles, they have 2 options if they have any hope of being successful. The first is to give their player enough information to navigate the game on a first playthrough with a steady escalation of challenge and reward, or 2, be Dark Souls. And despite what Metacritic reviewers would tell you, not every game is fucking Dark Souls! So sometimes the game has to give you some information, and music is one of the best ways to convey that information in a way that is subtle and immersive, yet still effective. Fighting alongside or trying to save your fellow Marines? Boom! Military march. Quietly making your way into a Covenant stronghold? Boom! Sneaky music. A horde of hungry, sucky boys starts looking at you like your parents look at the Fiesta Lime Chicken at Applebee's? Boom! Creepy strings and drums. The game pairs these themes with their events more overtly toward the beginning of the game, then starts to build on those ideas as the plot thickens, helping the player to make decisions by suggesting environment and mood. While these individual music cues are designed to give you motivation and information specific to that moment, the recurring use of the Dorian mode, specifically by starting in the first tetrachord and then moving to the second, is an example of a motif. Throughout the Halo campaign, music cues will establish a sense of danger or urgency in the first phrase, usually centered around a minor 1 harmony and a melody that stays restricted to the first tetrachord, encouraging you to focus and look out for potential threats. In the amount of time it takes you to survey that threat and make your plan, the music cue frequently moves to a major 4 harmony with a melody that ventures into use of both tetrachords, suggesting a heightened level of excitement as you engage the enemy. That minor foundation with a hint of major sonorities helps set the tone for who we are as the Master Chief, a character presented a dangerous and seemingly hopeless situation who still has the strength and resourcefulness to survive and continue forward. When that minor to major motif is heard in a high-energy music cue, it helps the player take on the shoes of the fearless Master Chief. But when that same motif is heard in a slower, more somber music cue, it emphasizes the bittersweet nature of the Master Chief, one of heroism and hope, but also of sacrifice and loneliness.
Did anyone else make it?
Scanning. Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do for Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. Halo, it's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
That idea of hope and tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds shapes the entire game. From the first moments your character is playable, you're the last best hope to keep Cortana safe as the Covenant overrun the Pillar of Autumn. When you land on Halo, everyone in your escape pod except for you has died, but you continue to search for survivors. In Truth and Reconciliation, you and a ragtag bunch of Marines save Captain Keyes despite being hopelessly outnumbered. And again, when nothing but total eradication of the galaxy seems to be an option for stopping the Flood, you make a mad dash to blow up the ring, losing everyone from the Pillar of Autumn, but saving the galaxy as a result. The music generally reflects that battle between danger and victory, hopelessness and optimism. And while most of these moments have themes in the Dorian mode, it's in those most heart-wrenching, low-point moments we get the very rare, at least in this series, minor theme. And since minor themes haven't been used much up until these points, the impact is really felt. That, I think, gets to the real magic of Halo. Like, sure, the controls feel really good. The gameplay is a ton of fun on its own. Third item on list. But when it comes right down to it, my lasting memories of Halo come from its emotional impact. While I understand why most franchises have moved away from focusing on PvE so that they can focus more on their like competitive PvP enterprises, it's been a long time since I have played an FPS game with as many exciting and satisfying and devastating moments as the original Halo games. And like the music shares a big part in that. Like I can't see a Halo appearing in space without hearing the main theme. I can't think of a somber scene without thinking about Unforgotten. And like, I cannot see a ship of feuding Covenant without thinking about friggin' Breaking Benjamin. Like, are you serious? That was so satisfying. Like, how do you not? Like, oh my god. So, to any FPS game devs out there who might be watching this little video, give us more stories. Give us more big, impactful moments. Make us feel like we're shooting at something for a reason. And I guess most importantly to this video, give us music that's worthy of a good story. Oh, and also to Halo Infinite, please, for the love of God, don't suck.